Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Matthew Kamakuni Lynch. I will be your host today, and I will invite, excuse me, I will introduce you all to our guest this morning in just a second here. But just quickly going to run through some housekeeping. This session is scheduled to go to about 1:30. It's going to be a mix of talk story between Naʻalehu Anthony and myself. We're going to be sharing some video content as well during that talk story component. And then in the second half of today's session, there'll be an opportunity for some breakout sessions and some sharings out to wind up the session today. Feel free to take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat and where you're joining us from today. Laurel Picunas is the UH Manoa Vista for the coming year, and she's being our chat moderator. So you may have already seen her there introducing herself in the chat box. And she's going to be helping me monitor the chat for Q&A as well. On behalf of UH, I'd like to start us off today with a respectfully offering a land acknowledgement. So as I said before, my name is Matthew Kamakuni Lynch, and like many modern humans, I'm descended from long lines of peoples who have been severed from the indigenous ancestral knowledge systems and the intimate relationships that my distant ancestors once had with very specific places. My family has been living in Hawaii now for over 4 generations, having originally immigrated on my mom's side from the Philippines to work as exploited labor in the sugarcane and pineapple plantations, which arose after the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom on January 17th, 1893. My role at the University of Hawaii is in service as the Director of Sustainability Initiatives for the 10 campus UH system. And wherever you are today, we each of us still exist in place, not just in cyberspace as faces on a Hollywood Squares screen. So please take a moment, look out a window, out a door that's near to you, and just let's take a deep breath and sense our connection to wherever you are. I currently serve, as I mentioned, as the Director for Sustainability Initiatives, and my community work takes me to Waianae, where I serve on the Board of Directors for Kahumana Organic Farm, and also to Manoa Valley, where I've been working with Uncle Bruce Keolani and Living Life Source Foundation to bring back the native koa forests of Manoa. Today I am speaking to you, I beg pardon, I would like to recognize Hawaii as an indigenous place and ask us all to honor all Native Hawaiians who are the ancestral descendants of these Aina, who have lived, loved, laughed, played, cried, and taken care of the many places of Hawaii for generations upon generations. And today I'm speaking to you from my home in Kaimuki, where the winds of summer are hot and the dirt is red. And I am in the mo'o of Kālahu, in the ahupua of Kapahulu, the moku of Kona and the moku puni of Oahu, in the Pai'aina of Hawaii. Finally, I'd like to recognize that generations of Native Hawaiians and their indigenous ancestral knowledge systems have shaped Hawaii in ways that are so far beyond quote unquote sustainable that they allow us to enjoy the gift of these islands even today. And for this, I'm grateful. As a settler ally, I seek to support the indigenous peoples of Hawaii to protect their lands and their communities, and I've committed my own personal time and resources to working in solidarity. So, thank you, everybody. Let's see. Our purpose here today is to explore the roles and responsibilities of ourselves and indeed of the university to our communities and to our places in light of the scale and magnitude of the challenges that we face during these times. That is the wrong image. Let me stop screen share. As a result of participating in today's session, our hope is that you'll be able to hear perspectives from a frontline community in the United States that is already facing possible climate relocation. We'll also hope to hear some updates about the Hōkūleʻa Worldwide Voyage. We'll also have an opportunity in the second half of the program to reflect upon our kuleana to each other and to our places. And more specifically, we're going to contemplate 3 specific questions in light of our conversation today. 1, what is the purpose of education? 2, what skills and competencies do students need today? And 3, how must the university transform to meet these times? So without any further ado, it's really my distinct honor and privilege and pleasure to introduce you to Naʻalehu Anthony, who is a Native Hawaiian from Kaʻaʻawa, Oahu, and is the founder of Palikū Documentary Films, which is a production company that focuses on documentaries and oral histories with a specific and special emphasis on Hawaiʻi and her people. Naʻalehu has a vast array of experience in the film industry and has been immersed in the Hawaiian community throughout his life. His desires to give voice to Hawaiʻi stories as told by Hawaiians from Hawaiians' perspective, and it's the very reason that Naʻalehu pursued a career in film and television. His other great passion is being a part of the voyaging community, and as a crew member since 1996, and more recently as a captain aboard Hōkūleʻa. His voyaging experiences have shaped and defined him as a person, and he's been a focal point for his films. He was in charge of onboard communications for the team that documented the Worldwide Voyage and sailed multiple legs of the journey. Hello, Naʻalehu, welcome to here. Thank you for being with us today.
Hey, aloha. Mahalo nui for having me.
Right on. So, you know, as we were talking to prepare for today's session, there was a momentous occasion and milestone and passing that's recently happened, right? And I wonder if you might give some words to that.
Yeah, you know, this just a week ago, we lost our captain and navigator, Kalepa Wabayan. And I wanted to take a minute to just bring his essence into the space today. He was a University of Hawaii employee for many years, and he was someone that just brought about the kind of the idea of what education is all about on board a canoe. And it was far too soon to lose him, and I'm still kind of reeling from what that means on behalf of the voyaging community and the Ohana Wa'a. And I wanted to just bring him into the space today to acknowledge that, because of his contribution to education and the fact that he had spent so much time on the Hilo campus at Imiloa as the navigator in residence. And so if you haven't heard the name Kalepa Wabayan before, you should look him up, because he is one of the people who dared to dream about what life might be like if we started sailing canoes again. And he's one of the folks that I consider a teacher and a mentor on board the canoe. So mahalo, Matt, for the time to bring him into the space.
Yeah, of course. And you were even traveling in Hilos. Are you still there?
No, I came back already. I was in Hilo for a little bit of work, but he passed away in Seattle, and so they brought him back Wednesday night. And so I don't know, maybe about 100 of us went down to the airport just to give our aloha.
Wow. Yeah, I appreciate you still being here, even in light of all of what's going on at the moment. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the conscious decision that you were sharing with me that Kalepa had sort of made to work on what the canoe could bring to people? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, Kalepa got involved with the canoe like right around 1979 or 1980. And in a kind of a real and put forth the kind of effort to become one of the trainees in leadership and in navigation very early on. And what you see over subsequent decades is not just his commitment to voyaging when the canoe would go out, but also to really better himself through education, to be able to share what he learned from Mal and Nainoa and the rest of the leadership at that time, and to bring that into a space and a place that really allowed him to interface with kids who maybe hadn't met the canoe before, but certainly could benefit from the perspective that comes from being on a canoe. And so, you know, he went back to school. He learned Hawaiian actually later in life. He was the captain and navigator of the Punanaleo canoe, Hōkūleʻa. And then, you know, all of that culminates to me into the Worldwide Voyage, where I think he sailed like 18 of 31 legs of the Worldwide Voyage, and typically as either the captain or navigator or both. So, you know, in charge, but also that he gave, you know, literally hundreds of canoe compass presentations all over the world.
Yeah.
All over the world. So as we're going through the photos now and we're looking at the mark that he left on the planet, literally like in ports, I mean, just all over the planet, he was able to interface with youth to talk about the importance of canoes and to the importance of traditional knowledge that have guided these canoes for many thousands of years.
Thanks so much for sharing. You know, as we prepared for the session, I know we found ourselves talking a lot about Hōkūleʻa's visit to Tangier Island back in April 2016. We have a 7-minute clip to share with folks today. Could you just set this up and tell us a little bit more about what we're about to see?
Yeah, absolutely. Tangier Island, so I got to go there actually and help bring the canoe there in April of 16. And I was also part of the pre-planning, and I think we went there maybe a year ahead of time. And it was just an amazing set of experiences, because this was one of those places that was like, there were so many elements that felt like we were back at home, but it was just so starkly different. The weather was different, the boats were different, the people looked different, they spoke differently than we were used to, but there were also just so many elements that connected us based on using the ocean to sustain us. And I knew that it was going to be just a really special story after meeting some of the characters that we were going to interact with. But then I think once we started shooting it and when we got the canoe there, to me, it felt like the core of why we were going around the planet. And so we actually edited this piece on the road. I think Maui Tautaha cut it in a hotel room in DC because we wanted to be able to share it out. It was just such a powerful experience. So, you know, maybe you can roll it, and then when it's finished, we can talk a little bit about what that piece means and what some of the lessons might have been.
They're traveling all over the world, taking their time and giving their time, traveling all over the world to let people know about their heritage. And we're losing our heritage, and we're going to lose it. We know this.
We found Tangier as part of the research, but initially it came out of the research as this enormous environmental challenge.
There's some areas along Tangier we were losing 25 to 30 feet of shoreline each year.
These people would be the first refugees to climate change and the consequence of sea level rising. And that's how we initially saw why we would come, to capture that story of a drowning community.
This has been going on forever, but we're just running out of land to give up now. And like I tell folks, when it gets to your doorstep, you pay more attention to it. So we're really running out of time and land, and we really need to get some protection for the island.
As one of the first communities in the United States to suffer the consequences of a combination of environmental issues, including rising sea levels and erosion, Tangier Island, Virginia was an imperative stop for the crew of Hōkūleʻa to learn about the plight of these fellow islanders.
I'm gonna ask you guys a bunch of questions about your life on your island. And
having the Hōkūleʻa here and the crew, I had read some about the vessel and the voyages that she had made, and but to actually have her to come into Tangier as part of their World Voyage, it's just unbelievable that they made us a part of their voyage, and that they came into our harbor, and that I actually got to sail on the vessel.
It was good. I wouldn't take it out of my life like this. I told my wife, ready to go home now. Ready to go home. This is a good thing in my life. And it was a scary thought too, to go out there. I got a picture of your ancestors on that boat. They knew the Lord too. You better believe they did. They had somebody on their side. They do.
To have them on the deck of their canoe, and then to have the kinds of conversations that we have with them. These are ocean people, and they pride themselves on that. And, they don't call themselves refugees, even though on the outside there's this suggestion that they're going to be the first refugees to climate change in the United States. They're not willing to be lowered to that kind of definition and that kind of standard.
Tangier's a unique place. It's a very close-knit community. The people are close together, they help each other. And on Tangier, everybody knows everybody else. And we've been fishermen and crabbers for, a couple hundred years now. And it's a very nice place to grow up. It's a nice place for kids. It's a safe place. And being a fisherman or crabber, it can be a hard way of life sometimes. But like any job, it has its ups and downs, but it's, all in all, it's very nice. I enjoy it. When a female is going to shed for its last time, it will get pink and blue color here.
that got more red in it.
Yeah, that one got more red. Yep.
I've always thought life on Tangier was a good life. I mean, the heritage that we got and the love that we have for each other.
Being with them and talking to them, they are committed to their home. They're committed to their place. They're committed to their children. I mean, they are very family oriented.
The community of Tangier is actively working with the federal government and the Army Corps of Engineers to look at options that will prevent further loss of land on Tangier Island.
These are hard-working people, and they're going to find a solution. Their great-grandparents did it, their grandparents did it, their parents did it, and they're going to do it. This place, Tangier, is a lot like Hawaii. It's been very powerful being in the place and with the people to help us rethink what's really important. It's been a place where I come to be very thoughtful about when I go home, what am I going to do?
Met some people just like me. You are. You've got the same heart that I got, and that's good.
I've made friends, new friends that I'll never forget, and you've had an impact not only on me, but in the whole community. Different citizens have been talking to me about the boat, your voyage, and the people that you're a caring, humble people, and you've made a big impact on them. So thank you.
But that's the power of the canoe and voyaging, and the magic of the Worldwide Voyage is that you end up in places with people and you make connections you could never imagine until you go. Until you go.
Wow. Right. That was powerful. Are you still in touch with the folks from Tangier?
So there was actually these guys from the American Canoe Association. They use the word canoe a little bit differently, like canoeing, like in rivers, but we made friends with those guys, and they helped us to coordinate a lot of the East Coast engagements. And those folks we are in pretty regular contact with. I was just sending over, I don't know, a couple of photos that they had requested just the other week. So yeah, that stuff still persists.
What are some of the key things that, or the key lessons or key learnings you took from your time there?
Yeah, you know, one of the things is that as we were, so that piece that we just saw, I would say like 90% of it made it into the final film that we did that talked about the whole Worldwide Voyage. And, you know, there are obviously a number of global climate change stories that are affecting nearshore communities in the Pacific that we could have chosen to highlight. And one of the things that I think was important to us was, as filmmakers, we wanted to make sure that we showed that this wasn't just brown people in the Pacific who were facing some of these challenges, that this was something that would be coast to coast and is affecting all kinds of people. And that really, as we went around and we showcased different folks, we wanted that to be like a really solid reflection of the kind of people who should and could care about something like the Worldwide Voyage. I mean, if you think about it, right, these folks had never heard of Hōkūleʻa before maybe 2015. And then very quickly, as they were doing research and figuring out who we were, and when we met face to face, there was this realization that we had a lot in common. And what's so interesting, right? So we shot this in April of 2016, and we weren't editing on the film to get the film finished until 2018. So like basically 2 years later, we're cutting on the film. And if you all recall, there had been an election in 2016 that kind of changed the face and the direction of where the country was heading. And so one of the things that came up as we were cutting on the film in 18 was just that there was actually all of this press that the gentleman, so there were pretty much like two gentlemen that we interviewed for the piece. One of them was the older guy, George, and I think the other guy was, I think his name was Bob. They called him Uker. He was the mayor. And he had made this comment. So they have been trying to get the Army Corps of Engineers to basically build a retaining wall around the whole island to preserve it, because depending on who you ask, it's either global climate change or it's the fact that parts of the Chesapeake Bay are actually moving and sinking, and so it's a combination of the two. But as this stuff moves around, they were saying, okay, well, build us a wall to hold in the rest of the island. And I think like the New York Times picked him up. He had done this quote saying there was the big uproar about the wall between the U.S. and Mexico. And he said, oh, if President Trump wants to build a wall, they can come build us a wall. And at one point, President Trump was going to go fly over there on his helicopter because they're just right outside the Potomac Basin, right? They're like, the next stop we did was DC after Tangier. It was right around the corner. And as it turns out, and this is the part that, like, when we show the film and the Q&A comes up, people are really kind of taken aback by, is that I think like 80% of the island voted for President Trump in the 2016 election. And the part for me that's so important in the lesson of this is that, and especially in seeing kind of how everything has played out since then, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we can still find connection with people who may have differences of opinions or political direction if we choose to. And that, you know, I was there for the whole of the engagement. None of that engagement was contentious. None of it was based around politics. It was based around the things that that we all valued. And it was based around these very common experiences, even though those folks hadn't been to Hawaii and we hadn't been to Tangier before. So yeah, that's just something that really kind of sticks with me out of the whole voyage. That one engagement is a really important lesson for me as a human.
Yeah, that it reminds me of some of our conversation to prepare, and this really stuck out. Something you said really stuck out with me, that, you know, if you seek it out, there is a space where we can see that we're more alike than we're different. And I think that rings true, especially in light of the scale and magnitude of the challenges that we face. And a question for you, also a question for our audience. I'm going to invite our audience to share their reflections to this question in the chat. But it's also directed to you, Naʻalehu. Sort of like, I'm wondering out loud, what are some of the ways that we can form partnerships with folks that we might not agree with to work on solutions? And I'm especially thinking about just how intense. I'm a sailor. I'm not a voyager. Like, my sailing is like around the mark at Diamond Head, not crossing oceans. And so even in that context, like, we have to figure out how to work together, you know. So I'm trying to think, like, what are the lessons? Are there lessons, you know, that Hōkūleʻa can teach us about figuring out how to work together and forming unlikely partnerships?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about just the idea that the Worldwide Voyage took place, you know, in 2011 and 12, when the architects of the voyage were putting together all the pieces, like, there was a certain amount of impossibility of just even whether or not it was like feasible, from all the different ways in which you could claim something is feasible. And certainly what that did was it forced us to rethink how important all of the folks who maybe don't come sailing, like don't physically get on the canoe, but are supportive of foraging or supportive of the intent. And, you know, in many senses, that forged a bunch of unlikely partnerships. And certainly, you know, the metaphor of the canoe, right? The kind of the what I would deem as the overused olelo no iao of himoku hewa'a himoku, that the canoe is an island. The great thing about the canoe is that when you get on board, you are forced to come to terms with the fact that you are putting your life in other people's hands, and trust before you get to it pretty quick when you're on the canoe. And that requires, I think, a negotiation of how to do that in kinds of spaces. And I think that's a great metaphor for what we need to do moving forward.
Oh, looks like we lost.
All right, I'm back now.
Okay, right on.
Just dropped off. Must have been the good part that I just said.
Yeah, tell us the good part. It probably cut off right then.
But just that the canoe, the metaphor of the canoe is very realistic for what we're dealing with now as a community. It's like we have to come together face to face, and there's, you know, my opinion is like there's some really, really hard questions that this community has to come to terms with really soon, because it's going to send us in different trajectories based on the answers to those questions.
Mm. Yeah, Anya notes in the chat in response to that question, establishing facilitated spaces for safe dialogue. I'm curious, what solutions have you seen other islanders work on through your visits? Be they like solutions as to like how they're figuring out how to forge these unlikely partnerships, or even if they're just sort of more, technical solutions to broader question of quote unquote solutions. What were some of the things that you saw and learned about when you visited islander communities?
I mean, some of the things that I got to see firsthand, like in French Polynesia, is you have communities that are basically taking back the kuleana for their places and spaces. And so they're not waiting for the government to act to say, I know we went to Huahine in 2014, and there was this whole peninsula and all the waters surrounding it that basically said, look, we're not fishing these waters anymore. And they just, they locked them down because they recognized that the reefs and the fish and the clams therein had to regenerate. And that's not unlike what you see like in Mo'omomi and Molokai with Uncle Mac, or in other places where you have people stepping in and saying, you know what, enough is enough, and we have to take back the kuleana for these places. And I think in certainly in Hawaii, we have that push and pull as to whether or not you have the jurisdiction to do so. And, it's clear that we're running out of time. We're running out of time to make those decisions, because as we wait to find out if there's jurisdiction, there's less and less resource available, and it's clear that sea level is rising. So
yeah, wow. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast last night, and what you just said made me think of a phrase I heard. Something I'm going to paraphrase, but it was along the lines of taking back radical self-responsibility in service to our places and our peoples, and I think it's so interesting. That's a notion that lends itself to so many different means of expression. Yeah, let's, we have 2 more clips lined up, so let's transition to these next 2 clips. They're from episodes 8 and 9 of the web series.
Okay.
And that you produced for, I think, Hawaiian Airlines Hawaiian Sky series.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about each of these clips?
I think the first one is just a primer on the Worldwide Voyage, right? It's like a little bit of history, and just to give everybody a little bit of background on the voyage. And it also, if I'm not, I think I'm correct that there's also a little bit of just kind of perspective setting on how, like historically, how Hawaiians dealt with just sustainability in the past. I think it's just a brief reference. And the other one is a really cool project that we got to go to Governor's Island, right offshore of Manhattan, the Billy and Oyster project. And that we took the crew there when we were there in June of 2016. And that to me was just like a really interesting idea as to how you could take this notion, like this notion of what historically had been, and give it enough momentum to get a ton of people behind it to make it once again. And so the story goes that in New York Harbor, the clam beds used to be so high that they would stick out of the water, right? And the clams are these filter feeders that would clean all the water in the harbor. And so there were just, billions and billions of these oysters that were cleaning the harbor, and the harbor was clean, 200 years ago, and you could eat these oysters. And now they're, largely gone. And these folks on Governor's Island got together and said, okay, well, what do we have to do to produce 1 billion oysters? And so the Billion Oyster Project just got tons and tons and tons of momentum to be able to lead community, lead a school, and really lead this vision for what New York could be once again.
Awesome. Let's play the clip, shall we?
Sure.
Worldwide Voyage is an idea whose time has come. It's almost like a prayer to bring people from around the world together, to really make it obvious that the ocean unites everyone. Water is the key to life, and most water is ocean. 97% of Earth's water is out there in the ocean. It's also where most of life on Earth is. To bring awareness to people no matter where they live, from the tops of mountains to the deserts to high population to communities that have never seen the ocean, never touched the ocean, to make them aware that the ocean touches them. With every drop of water they drink, every breath they take, they are connected, and to bring them as a part of this voyage and change the way we do things. We have to.
You will never protect something you don't understand. And you're also not going to protect it if you don't care. So this worldwide voyage was going to go learn about the earth, going to see the people who do care, help us reshape this new kind of sail plan, meshing indigenous ancient wisdom with technology and science and bringing it together. If you went around in 1976 and tried to collect declarations on protecting the world's oceans, you'd probably come up with zero. People wouldn't even know what you're talking about.
After voyaging more than 2 years and 24,000 nautical miles, Hōkūleʻa arrived in New York City to celebrate World Oceans Day at the United Nations headquarters. The gathering marked a historic moment as ocean protection declarations collected from around the globe were presented to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. But the crew also recognized one local group who is restoring the Hudson River by taking a short ferry ride to Governor's Island, the home base of the Billion Oyster Project.
So these are our nursery trays. You can see that there's so many living things in the water, in just a matter of a couple weeks they get covered with invertebrates.
The Billion Oyster Project is a restoration and education project aimed at restoring a sustainable oyster population in New York Harbor and reigniting in New Yorkers a passion and appreciation for the harbor. And we do that by growing oysters here on Governor's Island with New York Harbor School and building reefs. And through our schools program now, we have 60 schools throughout the city where we train math and science teachers to teach their lessons through the lens of oyster restoration.
The project aims to distribute 1 billion live oysters around 100 acres of reef by 2030 to rehabilitate New York City's marine ecosystem, and its success in galvanizing schools, government organizations, as well as nonprofits made it an incredible learning opportunity for Hōkūleʻa and the Mālama Honua crew.
We're bringing them here to learn about how the school is integrated into a community-wide restoration project that is looking at the one of the most polluted waterways in the area, the Hudson River, and using oyster remediation, a technology that was in existence here for hundreds of years that went away for a while because of human impact, using the Billion Oysters project to bring back that natural habitat and to incorporate experiential education and innovation and community efforts to better their environment.
This is similar to New York Harbor. It's really foggy, so you can't even see the bridges or any of the other boats.
The group participated in discussions and tours of classrooms and facilities at New York Harbor School. It was a time of deep thought and conversation for Hawaii students, government officials, and especially our educational leadership.
I think it's really important that we're here at Governor's Island to learn about the Billion Oyster Project because we are at a critical place as an education system.
There's a lot of opportunities.
I'm wondering from this experience, how can we come together to really utilize education to solve our problems, both locally, nationally, and at a global level. That's the beauty of Mālama Honua. It helps to galvanize us around a central purpose and a central theme.
Right on. Is my audio okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay. The Billion Oyster Project, that I remember that very well because it inspired a UH effort around making the Alawai awesome. Curious, like what other examples did you see of meshing, as Nainoa says, of meshing indigenous ancient wisdom and technology and science and bringing it together?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's like it's embedded in the folks who participated in the voyage. And I mean, there are, you know, a ton of venues that we went to that were looking at different ways in which technology could speed up recovery in a lot of instances. And the I think the Billion Oyster Project was really highlighted because people immediately saw what might be possible in Hawaii. They saw the parallels really, really, really well, not only from the education standpoint, but also from just the possibility, like you're talking about. I remember, you know, on the island, they were talking about the alawai already, right? And that melding of science and technology, and looking at what kind of traditional knowledge persists is really, to me, the examples are best told by the people who sailed on the canoe. And you know, one of the people that I would highlight is a recent UH PhD would be Haunani Kane. And you know, she's a navigator in her own right. Now a longtime crew member. She sailed thousands of miles with us on the Worldwide Voyage, and she's working on global climate change and the effects on low islands. You know, as part of her research as somebody in academia. And I think the faster that we can erase those lines that are drawn in the sand on both sides of the equation and just be, you know, us rather than having to switch hats depending on who you're talking to, I think the better off we'll be, because we can acknowledge that, you know, the ancestors here were certainly scientists and certainly great observers. If the idea of science is this idea of observation, then, you know, these folks, I mean, the fact that they could sail canoes thousands of miles is the pinnacle of that success. And I think that there's still a lot to be learned in the perspectives and the values that come from traditional learning and traditional teachings.
Yeah, mahalo. That makes me think of Brian Glazer's work. Oh, by the way, I think I'm told that the technical term to describe the excellence that someone like Haunani Kane brings to bear is she won hama.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's incredible. And like, that is one of just many bright spots of, you know, folks across the university who are in relationship with our communities and therefore turn all of what they do in the university in service to our communities. Really powerful example. Makes me think of Brian Glazer's Smart Alawai project, where they're working throughout, and it's similarly a sort of meeting of wisdoms or meeting of knowledges where they've got low-cost sensors deployed, and they're also learning from the families of the area to learn about the mo'olelo and the intergenerational observations that have been carried down through those. You know, towards the end of that last clip, Mahina Pashan Duarte says something. She's asking out loud, how can we come together to really utilize education to solve our problem locally, nationally, and globally? And I'm curious to hear from you, Naʻalehu, you know, as someone who has gained this global perspective and, you know, met with communities elsewhere that are also on the front lines of climate change and climate response. Given that unique perspective that you've earned, what are your thoughts on the purpose of education? Like, what in these times, what is needed from our educational system?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think about education in both the formal and informal settings. And I mean, some of the greatest lessons that I've learned were outside of a classroom. I'm certainly not the kind of learner that does really well with a book and you know, sitting inside a classroom. And so I think about all of the other local kids who are like me, who maybe need other kinds of experiences to be able to, you know, learn. And I think the other piece of that is what you know, folks like yourself and my sister, I think, who's also on the call, and you know, certainly, you know, dozens and dozens of folks are running programs that also make it okay for local kids to excel. And like the part that is so exciting about someone like Hanani Kane being a navigator and a PhD is that she's also, you know, a local girl, and that she represents now someone who other local kids can look at and say, well, if she did it, then I can do it too. You know, we were showing, it's like probably one of the most memorable screenings I've done with the Worldwide Voyage film. We were screening at Kamehameha School's Kaʻaʻawa campus. And there's this part in the film right at the end where the whole navigation staff, they're all women, bringing the canoe home from Tahiti to Hawaii. And there's this measurement that you need before you turn to Hawaii. And they're all on the deck at night and they're all measuring the stars. And one of them was another navigator, Kaʻilani Murphy. One of them was Hanani Kane. And there's these, you know, this is powerful message of, like, you know, all the metaphors that come with wayfinding. And they're trying to measure to make sure that they know when to turn, because if you turn at the wrong time, you go miss Hawaii, and then you all kind of problems. And I look back, and there's like we're screening for like K through 4th grade, right? It's like a really young audience, and there's about, I don't know, 6 or 7 4th graders in the back of the room, all women, all girls, all standing up, all with their hands out, you know, emulating what they saw on the screen. And I thought, okay, well, we know that now this thing is not going to be lost, this thing called navigation. Like, we've restarted this flywheel of it, and it's moving now. And we have technologies to allow for people to understand that, oh, those are not only my ancestors that did this, but these are people in my community that do it now. And if all those guys did it, we can do it too.
It's such a beautiful story, such a beautiful image of, I can just imagine the girls standing there in the back of the room. I feel like I could, you know, keep talking story with you for a couple more hours, but we're at the point in our program where we're going to give our participants an opportunity to convene together and to contemplate these questions together in light of the talk story that we've just had over the past hour or so. So Laura's gonna paste the questions in the chat for you. And she's also going to set up breakout rooms of groups of 3 or so. So you'll be in groups of 2 to 4. It's going to be randomized. So just trust that you are in the group that you are meant to be in. And the idea here is just, you know, since we're not able to meet in person, we haven't been able to meet in person, there's something about convening and just talking story to make sense of things that gives us strategic and tactical benefits to our sense-making ability, helps us to reflect and integrate and understand, you know, new ideas or even ideas we've been carrying for a while. So in a moment, you'll see the invitation to join the breakout session. We will give you about 12 to 15 minutes or so, and I'll give you a 2-minute heads up before we bring you back into community again, so that we can hear from you folks. And there'll be time also for some questions and some final reflections from Naʻalehu at that point. But yeah, we'll go ahead and start the breakout sessions now. The questions are, what is the purpose of education? What skills and competencies do students need today? And how must the university transform to meet these times? We'll see you shortly. Hey, there we go. Hopefully coming back. Welcome back, everybody. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to invite you to keep your cameras on if you're comfortable. It's great to see everybody up on screen. Welcome back, welcome back. We just to let everybody know, the breakout sessions were not recorded. The main session is recorded, and we're also live streaming out to Facebook at Sustainable UH and Facebook KTUH. We have about 10 or so folks that were joining us. We were just jamming out, listening to some music as you guys were deep in conversation. So thank you very much, everybody. Welcome back. Would like to, we have some time together just to share and talk story in this way. So would love to invite folks to share some of your thoughts and reflections on those 3 questions here in the chat around what the purpose of education is, what skills and competencies do students need today, how must the university transform to meet these times. You can also raise your hand if you want, if you prefer to speak and share in person, so to speak. The floor is now open, and the feedback actually in the chat is really helpful, because then we can record it and capture it in. Nice, we're seeing a connection from, oh wow, my epic kumu from 20 years ago, Lala and Ula. That's great. Yeah, would anyone like to share any reflections on your conversations? Okay.
Naʻalehu, I was talking to Punihe. She turned up in my chat room, and we were talking about essence and you know, spirituality. And so I'm just wondering, you know, on your voyage, where are you seeing a resurgence of that as well? You know, I guess to frame it, we were talking about decolonizing methodologies, right? That you have all this authenticity and everybody's got all this book knowledge. But I think what we all miss about the kupuna is their essence. I mean, sometimes they were wrong, but they could laugh at themselves and they could risk, you know, and I really think that the holistic problems the world face are going to take holistic answers. And I think that they're found in that sort of realm. And that's something I don't even know a university could do. But I'm wondering if you see it in other communities or what you saw when you went throughout the world.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, I think you know, one of the things that I think is important to note is that everywhere we went, like everywhere that I went, and, you know, across the different trips that I got to sail, there was always like an acknowledgement of this idea that our kupuna, our ancestors, were like collectively the same. And obviously, like, you know, you go to places, you know, thousands and thousands of miles away, and maybe they're not, you know, they're not Polynesian, or we're not even in the Pacific anymore. But what that really meant to me was like the idea that these people had mana, and that those lessons and that mana still persists to this day. And that I think similarly, people from other cultures also understood the importance of the canoe and what the canoe represented, and what mana, like they could also recognize that the canoe had mana, even though this was not something of their culture. It was really one of the fundamental questions that I had internally when we were getting ready to leave Aotearoa and then head to Australia. It's like, would the canoe just be a wooden boat at that point? You know, in Polynesia, we recognize the tie to, like, especially in Aotearoa, they still know the names of the navigators that brought the waka to these different places that formed the tribes, right? But the mana of the canoe reverberated in such a way that even when we left kind of the Pacific proper, there was still this acknowledgement that this canoe carried something different than just a wooden boat. And then I think maybe just to cap that off, like coupled with that were like unexplainable ho'ailona that would carry us through this whole journey, that were critical to, I think, people just reconnecting to place and space and being on the water. And I think, you know, on the trip home from Tahiti to Hawaii, I got to sail with Pua Lincoln, and we were usually on the same watch. So I got to hang out with Pua a bunch. And one of the things that I think is really critical to this process is like you bring someone like Pua along, and there's like 4 or 5 navigators on board, and they're all working together. But Pua, in her teachings with all of her different teachers that are not necessarily water people, or they're not canoe voyagers, but they are inquisitive into the stars and inquisitive into the moon and in the kumulipo, was that things were revealed to her because you needed to be in the place and space in order to understand what that line of that chant meant, to bring back that essence, that idea of what the original quality of that mana'o was. And I think that's something that is really interesting as we move forward and bring different kinds of people on board the canoe.
Mahalo. Others?
Hi, Matt. Yeah, I like to share our conversations. And if we talk about the education, and yes, because this is a sustainability, we have to pass to the next generation. So and it's why like and in the video clip, and it's nice video clip we watched that the kids something and educated with that and beyond that the oysters one. That kind of activity is very important. We have to pass and that's our concerns and the sustainability to the next generation. And also in the economy part, it's very difficult how we can spend or invest money to prevent this climate change, other things. It's very difficult. But we have to make our action, we have to show something action and for the sustainability. So that's why that Hōkūleʻa, that voyage is one of the significant things. And but individual, you know, we all of us. So and we have to show to do the something in our level as well.
Yeah, mahalo Takashi. Anyone else? We probably have time for 1 or 2 more.
I'll just, my name is Adrian. I'll just go ahead and share a little bit about what my group talked about within that 15 minutes. So I know we touched upon the education, the significance of education. And I think one of the biggest things that one of my group members pointed out was just carrying it outside of the classroom. So whatever we learn, whether it's in the UH system or any system, that we're, you know, carrying what we learn in the classroom to the outside world and really trying to make a difference that way. And, you know, I think myself, along with the rest of my group members, we really agreed that, okay, it's one thing to learn something, but, you know, when you actually take it out into the real world, you're able to make a difference. So I think, I believe it's the correct term is service learning. So that's really just hands-on, taking it into the community. We just wanted to share that piece.
Mahalo for that. Really, thank you for that share, Adrian. May I ask what campus you're at?
I'm at Leeward Community College. Yeah.
Awesome. Leeward in the
Yes,
house. Mahalo.
Yes, sir. No problem.
Would anyone else like to share?
This is the part where you just start calling on people.
Okay, I'm gonna give it another beat or two before I do invite.
We heard from us. How about you? What's your mana'o?
Well played. Thank you for putting that back at me. Mahalo for the question. And part of the reason why, we're experimenting with doing this with live streaming and these other multiple formats is precisely to get to what Adrian was starting to describe. And that is, at the university, sometimes, we can have we can be so inward focused. The dramas of higher education, yeah, they seem like the world's biggest dramas. And then you step outside the campus and it's like, there's a whole other world out there. And so I wonder a lot about how can we remind ourselves of that, and how can we remember our roles, yeah? And so one thing that's been useful for me is to think about the academy, the institution, in terms of houses of knowledge. So we are one house of knowledge, or if we're 10 campuses, so maybe there's 10 houses of knowledge. That is the one system. And that has been here for 100 years, give or take. And there are many houses of knowledge from Ike Hawaii systems of knowledge that have been here for many hundreds of years. And so, the roles and responsibilities as junior sibling and elder sibling come to mind there. And that actually is something that I learned from Dr. Kaipuni Lipe, who has her hand up. So I'd love to invite you in to share.
Oh, thanks. I'm not sure I taught you that, but actually my question is, and so in all transparency, Naʻalehu is my big brother. And so my question is actually for you, Lehu, in this space that, as we're talking about, and the point Matt was making, and I think lots of folks are suggesting around, how education in general needs to transform, and as being someone who has, lived your life primarily outside of the university in your career, but always in education. I'm wondering from your perspective, as we kind of get to the end of this, for most of us who are in higher ed, either working or going to school, your mana'o for us. What are your dreams for us? What are your dreams for your keiki who are in higher ed now, and my babies, your nieces and nephews, and your eventual mo'opuna, not yet. But what are you hoping that we should be doing for the next generations, and also for the honua?
Yeah. In the breakout room, Michelle and I were talking about that, and just how education is shifting, and we were talking about the immediate needs of education shifting because of the pandemic, and that the university can be a place for some of that change to occur. And one of the things that led to, that we were talking about, was just this idea, and this is not a new idea, but how do we make the university system more accessible and provide for more access for kids who maybe aren't comfortable or haven't gotten to a place where they feel like they belong. And I know that Puni, you've worked on that yourself for many years, as well as Bubba, in looking at how that persists. And we have an opportunity now. We really do. Like, as education shifts and partnerships in educational institutions partner with things outside. I'm thinking about the canoe, and just like how many University of Hawaii employees, including your president, came and sailed with us, not as guest sailors, or guest individuals for a week, but came on as crew members. And we were talking about Dr. Linda Ferruto earlier. She sailed a bunch. Kavika sailed. I mean, there's just a number of people who have engaged that. And what that means is that we have access to these venues that make it real. And we use these terms like CBE and culture-based education, all those things, which are critical. but it to me is like, without the learning outside of the classroom, I would have never made it in a classroom. And I realized that I'm probably more common as a local kid who went to public school than not. And so how do we make room for these kids in a way that not only are they valued, but that they can bring value to something that, and hopefully we make it less foreign over time. And, you know, that I think is one of the other pieces, is that as folks come up and like look like them and act like them and talk like them, then that provides an entry point for them to feel like they belong and that they have something to contribute as well. So I don't know, there's no easy answers. I mean, decolonizing these institutions is, I was on a call yesterday, I called the UH system, you know, about the latent racism that persists across spectrum. And, you know, we have a ton of work to do, but there's, you know, plenty of momentum now. So we got to keep leaning into it.
Wow. Mahalo for that question, Punihe. And
yeah, thank you.
Mahalo Naʻalehu, brother and sister dynamic duo team there. That was actually, I could not have brought this to a close more powerfully than that. So I'll just shift towards acknowledging each and every one of you for spending, you know, 90 minutes of your day on our Friday with us to come listen, learn, connect, talk story. UH system, for those of you who are University of Hawaii personnel, about an hour before this event pushed out an invitation with a link to all the events, Earth Month events that are going around campus-wide or system-wide across all the campuses. So I'm really excited about next week's guest, Dr. Keith Cross, MC, PhD, AKA Dr. Bars. And we're going to be exploring navigating climate futures, or learning from ancient stories to navigate climate futures through hip hop. So that promises to be a very unique experience. Not to detract in any way, shape, or form from just the richness and the how lucky we are to have Naʻalehu here with us today. And Naʻalehu this morning, a group I was involved with, Punihe and I were involved with, we were invited to share some of our stories, and they honored us in the most beautiful way with the planting of an iliahi tree at one of their campuses. And so it just so happens that this weekend, this picture I took behind me is of Waiʻa Forest up at the top of Manoa Valley. And these huge albizia trees that are plants out of place and are displacing or causing some problems, let's just put it that way. We found a little kipuka, about 2 acres within the 300 acres, and this Sunday are going to be replanting some of the first koa, or there's existing koa in the highlands, but we are now inspired by this morning's events. We're going to plant one of those koa trees in honor of your time and what you've shared with us here today, just as a small token of our appreciation and gratitude. Yeah. So thank you for being here. And any last thoughts you'd like to close out with?
Just a huge mahalo, Matt, for putting this together, and for all of you guys work who are on this call. There's so much work to do in the community, and there's so much work to do in academia. And I mean, it takes that idea of, like, you know, literally huliau ilalo, you know, it's like you gotta dig down and do the work. And so, you know, thank you, Matt, for allowing the time today. And yeah, just looking forward to what's next. Mahalo nui.
Thank you so much. Mahalo, everybody. Have a beautiful rest of your day and weekend. Take good care and keep safe, everyone. Aloha.
God bless.